This is the presentation I made for my ecology exam. We live in a temperate deciduous rainforest. Temperate deciduous rainforests are located between the polar regions and the tropical regions. They have 4 seasons. Summer is usually the warmer season and is also has higher humidity, and winter is the colder season and is often more dry. Climate is like this in this region because of trade winds and latitude. Trade winds affect levels of precipitation. We have moderate amounts of precipitation in this area because of how the trade winds are. For example, most deserts on the planet are at a latitude of 30 degrees because of the way trade winds affect levels of precipitation. Latitude affects climate as well because at different latitudes there's different amounts of sun exposure. At the equator, um, environments get more direct sun exposure because the sun is hitting the earth at a 90-degree angle. But as you get further away from the equator, the angle the sun hits the earth is different, and this lowers the amount of direct sun exposure because the earth is a sphere. Um, an adapt an ad an adaptation that a plant has to survive in this region is the trees losing their leaves. So when it freezes, the water and the leaves of trees can freeze, and then when water freezes, it expands, and this can damage the leaf. To avoid this damage, trees um, lose their leaves before it gets cold and freezes. Also, to have, if they did experience this tissue damage, it would be like kind of really wasteful because they invested all this energy in growing these leaves, and then they would just like have all this damage. So it'd be like a waste of energy. So letting their leaves fall to the ground is a better because that energy is not being wasted. It's being decomposed by other organisms and then incorporated into the soil to be used again as nutrients. An adaptation that animals have in this region because of the climate is animals growing thicker fur in winter than in summer. Thicker fur helps to insulate animals from harsh temperatures. And then in warmer seasons, mammals grow thinner coats so that they don't have like a buildup of heat and they don't get overheated and then like get sick. So yeah, that's another adaptation. For the second question, I noticed that there wasn't a lot of plants and shrubs in the understory of the forest my sit spot was in. The ground cover was mainly just fallen branches and leaf litter. One of the few plants I did observe growing in my sit spot was the coralberry plant. I included a picture of it on the slide. For my hypothesis, I wanted to see if coralberry plant growth that would be affected if put under different light levels of light exposure. The forest understory doesn't have a lot of light exposure, so I wanted to see if coralberry growth would be higher or lower in a different area that had maybe more light exposure, like a clearing. The design of my experiment would be 10 coral berry plants growing in a low light exposure condition, which in this case would be the forest, and then 10 coral berry plants growing in a high light exposure condition, which would be a clearing. In this experiment, I would need to control for soil composition and also for space because soil composition can have big effects on how much plants grow. And also, space can also have a large effect on how much a plant grows as well, especially like the amount of space allowed for root growth. So, all plants in the study would need to be planted in the same type of soil and also in the same sized pot. Before the study, the plants in my study would need to be weighed. Then the plants would be allowed to grow for 2 months, and then they would need to be reweighed again. The weight gain in the 10 low light exposure plants would then be compared to the weight gain in the 10 high light exposure plants. The results of this study would tell us how, if light exposure does have effects on the growth of plants living in the understory of forest. It would also tell us if coralberry, what light conditions coralberry grows the best in. Some plants grow better in shade and some plants grow better in sun. Coralberry might be a plant that just tends to grow better in shade. The results of this study could also tell us something about secondary succession in forest. When we did the lab on forest composition, we learned that the canopy of forest is only populated by red cedar trees for one generation, because red cedar trees tend to like places with more sun exposure. This means the young of the adult red cedar trees would not be able to grow in the forest understory anymore. But other trees that are more resistant or more tolerant to shade, like oaks and maples, could grow there. The results of this study could indicate that lower growing plants or shrubs like coralberry tend to grow better at earlier stages of succession.